Hello, 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 hello. Yeah. Hello, all. I hope you got some nice pizza and drinks and stuff, and got able to chat with people. It's super fun to see you all here. Now we're gonna continue with the Fireside chat. So we're actually gonna have David ask us questions from the slide.io stuff that you are asking and upvoting. So if you want to ask more stuff or want to upvote more stuff, you can go to the QR code there, and yeah, we can continue from there. Also, like if you have later, we're also gonna check out the questions for the other talks, and like we can bring the other folks if you have more questions for those talks and stuff. So yeah, that's it. And now I think we can continue. You can take over.
Test.
Hello, hello.
Okay, cool. All right, everything works. So I guess we're mostly just, we're winging this. We're going to ask them some uncomfortable questions, which I'm a little bit disappointed. None of these are very controversial. No, there's a good one. And so FastAPI and, no, you can call it Flask, but more like Rust. FastAPI versus Rust. You know, I like this first. The most popular question, I actually like this. I'm a big Django fan. I've used Django for a long time. And if you don't know who I am, David Kramer, I started Sentry a long time ago. I write JavaScript these days.
This is pretty much the guy that is paying for this whole event.
That's not my money. Anyways, I grew up with Django, so I appreciate this first question. And Flask and FastAPI are both a puzzle, I would say. You got to piece it together. You got to choose your own adventure. I hate choosing my own adventure. I'm not very creative. So are there going to be any admin UI tools? And I like there's this like Postgres template thing, which hopefully helps you do things correctly. But like people want an admin. They want an easy way to build apps. Like, what's the plans there?
So I guess
I have no.
This is all FastAPI, but Armin can chime in why there isn't one. I don't know.
Cool. So the thing with an admin interface is normally that is tightly coupled with the database that you are using. If you are using a SQL database, it's going to be tightly coupled to the ORM, whatever that you are using. If you are using SQL Alchemy or SQL Model, there's a third-party open source project called SQL Admin, if I'm not wrong, that supports both SQL Alchemy and SQL Model, and will be the equivalent of like the Django admin interface. That is when you are using SQL Alchemy or SQL Model. But because FastAPI is not tightly coupled to one particular database, you could have just not have any SQL database and have like, I don't know, a MongoDB or like Cassandra or like whatever it is that you do. And then something that is made for one of those ORMs wouldn't work for this particular one. So it will also depend on the specific type of library that you are using to store and handle the data underneath. But if you are using something in SQL, you normally will be using SQL Alchemy or SQL Model, and then you can use SQL Admin as the library for doing like this admin interface. Like it already exists, you can just like use it. So
it is a solved problem, I'm told. But MongoDB is not a real database. I'm sorry. I just, we gotta clear the air there. Here's actually a question for both of you, because you built puzzle frameworks. Why not just bless one way? Like, it's only SQL Model, and it's only, maybe it's only Postgres is too far. But like, why not just say, this is the route to do everything correctly, and if you want to do anything else, good luck, have fun.
I mean, I can tell you why I never did it for Flask, because I didn't feel particularly convinced that any one of those SQL solutions are particularly great. SQL Alchemy was just the closest. So it's like my lack of commitment, I think, is the answer. Because like I chose a template engine, which I was very convinced of, but the SQL
there might be some bias.
Never really felt really great.
I think there's some bias that Armin wrote the template engine, so I don't think it counts. All right, Sebastian.
I guess for FastAPI was like, well, Armin decided to do that. I will do whatever he did, sort of.
This is how it happens. You can't. It's like the misplaced trust.
No, but actually, like I knew that FastAPI could be used, for example, without users. You could have just like bots using tokens, and the tokens could have like, I don't know, public key cryptography to just verify stuff and then just communicate with other APIs and just have no database at all. And I wanted FastAPI to have just the things that you always needed for APIs, like data validation, data serialization, and like if you can get for free documentation and all the stuff, then nice. But I didn't want it to have the things that you will not always require. For example, in Django, you always have to have a SQL database, even if you don't plan to use it. So I wanted to have something that will allow you to have the things that you always need, but not the things that you don't always need. And it's not that it's like a fault in the design of other frameworks or something like that. It's just that Django was made in a moment where that was all the applications were doing. It's just like rendering HTML in the backend connected to a SQL database. But now that we have like these other ways to do stuff and just like APIs and things, I want to have something that will target just that. So, yeah.
I think it's also that even if you look beyond the Python ecosystem, a lot of the modern frameworks don't come with a database. And I'm assuming it's big cloud-hosted database that's behind all of this. But like people pick things other than Postgres now.
It's all Postgres or MySQL under the hood. Okay, I'm going to apologize in advance. I'm not going to ask half of these questions because I want to be conscious of some of them being specific, but I'm going to change them. And maybe they'll still be good. But if you have a specific question for somebody, harass them afterwards for sure. So let's go with this one. Why Rust? Or why not Rust?
So I think for Sentry, it was sort of a very gradual pet peeve of mine, interest to how can I sneak this in? And it turned out to work quite well. I think that for Python in particular, it's just the interpreter is still pretty slow. It's not super slow, but it's like not amazingly fast. And so people build these extensions all the time, and Rust is just definitely more enjoyable than C and C++. And I think the other part of where this Rust part, I think, generally fits in for people is that and it's going to sound very controversial, but the packaging manager in Rust is really great. And you can depend on things, and it works, and Python doesn't quite have that yet. So I think that and I think this applies to Pedantic as well. It's like Pedantic actually has quite a few dependencies that it can use very easily. And in the Python ecosystem, maybe we don't really have that well, but in C and C++ you definitely never had. And so some extensions you can write in Python now because you can depend on 30, you can depend on, I don't know, like I've seen ASGI web server written in Rust now. So there's an entire ecosystem you can very easily pull in, and it works. And you would never have built any of this in C or C++ because depending on native extensions, right, native vendored libraries in those languages was just never great. So I think that's a pretty big reason why that is happening.
What's your take on this?
My take is not very useful here because I don't know Rust yet. I really want to learn it, but I still don't know.
But why don't you know it?
I just haven't had the chance to go and learn it. I really want to, but I think it's also great that people like Armin or Samuel can go and learn all the tricks of Rust and build very high performance stuff that we can all benefit from in the Python side without even have to deal with that. So people sometimes ask me like, oh, then we should all go and learn Rust. And I actually think not. Most of the people don't need to learn Rust because we can all just benefit from that in the Python side. So that's really great. Now on Rust versus other languages like, I don't know, C or something. I remember when I was just like curious and trying to see like, what is the best thing that you could go for? And I remember asking a C Python core developer, a couple of them. But I remember Christian Heims said like, well, Rust is a very nice language. You get like, all these features and like all this safety and stuff. C is like a double-edged sword that cuts you, but it also spikes you and shoots you with a bazooka in the face. So just go and learn Rust. And just like, if I was going to pick something, I would pick Rust. I have to deal with C. Don't do that. That was his answer. So he was like, okay, I probably won't learn C. I will be still wanting to learn Rust at some point.
That's fair. How many of you have learned Rust? Show of hands. Not many. How many of you know how lifetimes work? You see? Point made. It's very complicated if you haven't tried, but it's very fast and portable, and I think that's one of the nice things. All right, let's see. What do we else? This one's a little bit specific. Pedantic versus adders, because Hinnick is here, and so we have to make him as uncomfortable as possible.
Adders is not a database validation library.
Do you mean data classes? Okay, so you chose it for the framework. We use one. I don't know if you know anything about the decision. I think it's Pedantic, but I'm not actually sure.
We use both.
Oh, just kidding. We use both. We actually probably also use data classes.
We use all three things. There's also data classes.
If it exists, we use it. So why did you make the choice on Pedantic?
For me, it was that at the time when I chose that, adders didn't have support for just the standard type annotations. You will use just default values. That was the thing that was available when adders was designed and when many of these libraries were designed. Then at some point, it also had support for using type annotations. I think Pedantic, I'm not sure if Pedantic was there when data classes already existed. Like, it was very close in time. I'm actually not sure. But the thing is, for me, it was just like, okay, this is just plain type annotations without doing anything else, and I wanted to do this one. But it was just like a choice at the moment. It wasn't more than just like, yeah, I just want to have these type annotations. Also, Pedantic was exactly like a data validation library, and adders is a library for helping you handle classes, but not doing like all the stuff underneath. And in many cases, you don't need to have like all the stuff of data validation and all that stuff. I needed that for FastAPI, so it was just like, yeah, let's go with Pedantic.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, I guess that makes sense. Like, my experience with adders is it's types without all the mess. In a way, it lets you define structs basically, if people know what structs are. But yeah, we use all three at Sentry. I don't know why. I'm sure there's a half reason. Actually, here's a good one. We're gonna continue rephrasing questions. Both of you maintain open source projects, and I actually think this is interesting. Maintaining open source projects is hard. Armin somehow is like pawned off all of his stuff on other people. You have not necessarily. I'd be curious, like, let's hear both angles of like, how do you actually continue to maintain things or add maintainers and things like that? And maybe you want to start, Sebastian.
So I think it's a funny thing that handling open source looks very different from the inside than it looks from the outside. So you normally see, and it's like, from the outside, it looks like, oh, there's a bunch of people just contributing, and like there's this word community that feels like it's like a self-sustained entity that just doesn't tire and just doesn't eat and just like works. And it's actually not really like that. There's just a few people. It's just a bunch of actual people that are just like working on the things. And if you see the major frameworks, all the libraries, open source tools, like they are mostly just like, a few people working underneath and a few people doing most of the work. Like if you see Flask, currently is David Lord. If you see Django, there's also like a couple of people. FastAPI is like mainly me. But I get a lot of help from other people like Marcelo, that is probably around there. And like, so one thing that I find that is super interesting is like most of the help that I get, the thing that is helpful the most is actually answering questions from others in GitHub discussions. And I think that should have a lot more value than is like currently visible, Like in GitHub you have like, oh, who are the contributors? And you just see like, where is the people that is committing code or something? That's also why I created the official FastAPI experts and the FastAPI people to highlight all that work that actually is a lot of the work that I will have to be do, and I wouldn't have time to just code, just to get like all that help. So just helping others with the project is one of the best ways to receive help. Yeah. I
agree. Like the community, you see this in business too. It's like customer support, community management. You appreciate it when you get a bad version of this. And you often don't appreciate it when it works exactly as you expect. Armin, what's your take on this?
So I think that one of the challenges that I always had with growing open source projects is when your personal interest all of a sudden is below other people's interest. And so an example on this is, so Flask is actually a very significant example of this because I at one point didn't use it. I just had other things, like, yeah, particularly when I started working at Sentry, we had a lot of Django there. We didn't have that much Flask there. And I was like, well, I don't care that much about it right now. And then the amount of support requests was still the same. And then you kind of have to figure out, like, do you still care that much about it, or do you want to have someone else work on it? And that works really well when the person that then takes over or sort of merges into a project has the same idea of how it should work. It turns into a problem if you never really spend that much time on it, and all of a sudden you give it to someone who maybe doesn't share the same ideas. I have a Rust library that became way more popular than it should have become, to just output text on a console. And there's another maintainer on this project, and we just randomly commit to it with no agreement on anything. And sometimes it's like I undo his PR, and then he undoes my PR. So that clearly doesn't really work. But it's shockingly hard to get other people onto a project if it has reached a certain level of popularity. If it's just a small project and they're like maybe a handful of users, it's super easy. But then once it goes beyond a certain point, there will be unhappy people. And then the people that you have to actually get as a maintainer into it, they have to be decent human beings, because to some degree your name is attached to this. And when you have someone who just doesn't behave the way you would behave, then you still have your name attached to it to some degree. So I think actually growing contributions is really hard.
This is tough. There are some good questions in here that are a little spicy. All right, I actually like this one. So first, TypeScript or JavaScript?
For me, TypeScript all the way. Like, I made a framework to get auto-completion. I have really bad memory. I need the auto-completion. In JavaScript, I can't get all the auto-completion of TypeScript, so yeah, for me.
Okay.
So I don't like Python typing, famously so. I do really like TypeScript, but a version of TypeScript where the amount of code greatly outweighs the number of type declarations. And I know some people that are very clever, and they use TypeScript in a way where it's completely unreadable. And when it reaches this point where you need to have a PhD in type theory, it just...
This person works as Sentry.
Yes. Not great. I made one such attempt recently because of a Twitter discussion. And I felt really ugly afterwards, having created this monstrosity of conditional types.
So, okay. I have a bone with the Python community, and I'm glad that Samuel asked this. It is ridiculously annoying and complicated to use JavaScript frameworks with Python backends, because I have to spin up a service architecture all of a sudden, right? And so let's go back to why do I got to put all the pieces of the puzzle together? You know, Flask is a little dated. You know, it's old. You know, it's showing its age. Django, no better, to be fair. And it's not choose your own adventure. Why is there not a default JavaScript like UI approach for? Let's start with FastAPI. Why is there not a blessed way that I can just take a React or Vue or pick literally any flavor of the week, and I can just make it work flawlessly without complicated Webpack and Dockers and all these other things?
I don't know.
I have an answer why Flask never got this, because the amount of churn in the JavaScript ecosystem was just too quick. And like the flavor of the day is changing. So
I think we got to solve this, by the way, people, to keep Python not just a data science fun toy, but I don't know if you pick a framework, but making it very easy it's painful. Trust me. If you haven't done it, it's painful because you got to spin up multiple services out, run. You got a thing that has to recompile your JavaScript, all this stuff.
I feel like it's got worse.
Yeah.
I remember there was a time when all you had to run was Webpack, and it was proxying through like the Python server. And it's like, okay, you run this thing, and it just also runs the other thing, and it's like good enough. But now to run anything JavaScript-y, there's a lot of things. Like first of all, you need to, nobody writes JavaScript anymore, so it's TypeScript now, so you need to transpile this and then transpile the other thing. And then it's not just the Webpack server that comes up, and all of a sudden there's like Edge. And
Edge, by the way, just means CDN on most days, in case anybody's curious. Okay, I'll slightly pivot on that question. If you would you pick a golden path, I guess? Would you say, like, we're going to make it so Next.js, I mean, that one's a little weird because it tries to do all this stuff, but something like Next.js or Vue is like the golden path for the framework. And you can just, if it's there, it'll just work. Or do you think that's the wrong idea?
For me, it's the thing is that when you separate the front end with the back end through an API, it's just like communicating through HTTP. And for me, the key point that the API has to provide is a way to communicate easily with that API. And for me, being able to build that on top of OpenAPI, which is what FastAPI does, then you can generate SDKs in TypeScript that have all the types and all the stuff, so that you can know that whenever you call this method in this TypeScript function, I don't know, create user, it's going to receive some specific data shape that the editor is going to complain, hey, you are not sending the right data. So you have type safety from the backend to the front end, changing languages all through these standards. And I think that is the key piece, because that is independent of what is the actual framework. If you do that in, like, I don't know, in a framework, in a front-end framework like AngularJS that tries to cover everything, including the front-end client, and it just wants you to use observables and RxJS and all that stuff, then like it's a bit more difficult to just like deal with all the things that they want you to do. But if you are using React or Vue.js or Solid or Svelte or whatever, and you can just use a JavaScript client that is auto-generated from the backend with all the type information, so you can get all the stuff and auto-completion and all that, I think that is the right way to approach it, because you can just plug and play that into any Python, into any front-end framework, JavaScript or TypeScript or whatever. So yeah, that's what I think.
This is the JavaScript people's dream, by the way. They have something called Zod and a bunch of other flavors of this, which just naively think of it Pedantic or adders or pick your flavor in JavaScript. But they also have Node.js, and they have the browser, and they can share types in one code base, which hypothetically is a good idea if it's easy. It's not easy these days, especially not for cross-language, and you have JSON scheme and everything, which makes it hard. All right, let's see what else we got in here. That's FastAPI. Okay, here's an interesting one, because they're very different. Go back to the open source thing, because you got a lot of overlap here. How does working on an open source project look financially? How do you make it sustainable until it becomes popular?
Tell me when you know the answer.
You charge money. Day one.
I think the only way to make money in an open source project, realistically speaking, is finding someone to sponsor you or figure out how to make it into a SaaS. I think that's it. And good luck finding out how to make a library into a SaaS, because that seems full of conflicts.
I think for me, like, I'm right now in an extremely privileged position because Sequoia created this open source fellowship program, so I get just to work full-time on open source. But that, like, you know, like pretty much no one can do that. So like the vast majority of open source developers cannot do what I'm being able to do. Just like, you know, just like work on open source and don't worry about food because it's just coming. But I think that and this is one of the main things that people, and I think this is quite interesting, that people complain about, like, oh, what is the boost factor of this? It's like, oh, if this person is hit by a bus, then we lose all this open source project and whatever. And then they push towards having that open source inside of an organization in GitHub. And then that organization is still handled by the same single person as before. So it's still a single boost factor of like, one in most of the cases. And the thing is, this applies to most of the open source projects, even if they are super big. Now, the fun thing is, I think that more important than the bus factor of like, oh, is there one person or not, is like who's paying for the bus tickets. If the person doing the open source stuff has some value out of doing that open source stuff, it's going to continue doing it. If the people, and it could be a whole team, doing whatever is the open source project. It could be like, I don't know, the front-end framework from Google. They don't see value in fixing this particular thing that is broken in the client because it's interpreting the standards wrong. They are just going to leave that PR for 2 years and then close it as, no, we won't fix it, which is what happened. But like, you know, so they have Google has more than one person. They have a very big boost factor. It's not a problem for them. And still, if the thing that they have to solve doesn't give them a particular value, then they're just not going to continue. So instead of seeing like how many people are there handling this project or like what are they doing, I think it's more important to see what is the value that these people, or what is the value that the people that are building this product are getting out of it. At the beginning, it can be just like the satisfaction of like, oh, I'm doing something cool for everyone else. But like at some point, you end up like getting hungry and wanting to eat food because we all eat food, or maybe go on vacations or something. And at that point, it might not be just like, oh, for the love of art or whatever. It might be that you get recognition and name out of just building open source, so then you can just get a very nice salary in a job, in a company or something. But it still has to be some type of value for the people that are putting the work. So there has to be some type of value received from that. And I think that is the key thing to think. Now, what is the right way to achieve that for open source developers? I have no idea still. I still don't know. There has to be some way. And that's also why I think like, like building a product or a company or something in our open source or whatever, like is the way to make sure that it's sustainable, is the way to make sure that it continues going on. So I think it's valid. It's also, like you have to put a lot of time on the commercial side or whatever, so it's just like this balance. But I think the most important thing to consider is what is the value that are these people that are working on that getting out of working on that, so that you can be sure that they are going to continue doing it.
And one thing to add there is like, it's not that I don't have any ideas at all. There's, first of all, if you work at a company that takes value out of an open source project, a lot of them at this point have GitHub sponsor profiles, and there's a very non-bureaucratic way, even in Germany, to throw money at it. And the other one is that even individually, if you like what people are doing, like besides your work, there's a way to show appreciation through sponsorship and stuff of that nature. And I think, if anything, the problem right now to some degree is that a lot of this money actually goes to popular projects. So your project is popular, so it probably gets money. So sorry for that kind of thing. But there are a lot of really small libraries from small people, and maybe you are only one of 100 users of it. And those projects currently don't really get that much appreciation because I kind of forget that they exist. So I think it's maybe generally a good idea to look into what is in your requirements file and then find the smaller ones and throw something in. Because like the one person that gets the first GitHub sponsorship probably enjoys this even more than the person that gets the 50th email of someone paying $5 a month.
Yeah. Can I get a time check? Do I got like 5 minutes? Do I got an hour? Fingers. Someone give me fingers. 5 minutes? Okay. Where was I going? I did want to say, like, Meta, Facebook, JavaScript ecosystem is great because of them. If we're honest with ourselves, React, Prettier, they haven't released everything that's like, God's gift or whatever, but great investments, it served them well, and I think people wrongly think that all open source must be sustainable or funded or anything. It shouldn't be. It's like good stuff should be, but also to the point of Flask and other things, it's like you just pass on the baton, and to your point of like, I've gotten a lot of jobs off of just building lots of random open source, and I just happened to luckily be able to turn one into a fairly successful company. There was just one of many hundreds of open source projects I worked on. And so I think the value is there, and there's like a lot of like interestingness. So I've got 2 more questions, so we're gonna go fast on one.
And we should get the other 2 as well. I don't know where they're sitting. Samuel and Marcelo. Yeah.
Oh, we can do a controversial one at the end for everybody. I actually have one, so I think a lot of people look up to you too. And so I'd be curious, and maybe other folks can chime in on this.
Just bring your own chair.
You have clearly spent a lot of like time, like personal time, and like you're clearly passionate about what you do. How do you think about that? Because I think a lot of people are like, how do I be like really successful, or how do I do great things that people like? And how has that worked in your life, I guess? Tell me what drives you. Why do you do all this? Because you're not sitting on a yacht right now. Like.
Yeah.
Lambo when?
So like, I don't know, like I was at the beginning, I was just like scratching my own itch. I wanted to have a bunch of features from a bunch of frameworks, from a bunch of things that I was learning. I was first trying to figure out like, to find the right one, but then like I didn't find one that will tick all the boxes, so I wanted just to have something that will do the things that I wanted in the way that I wanted done, also thinking what will be the thing that will help the most the teams I was working with. But it started like that. But then I saw that it took off and like people liked it and they wanted to use it, and it was like, oh, this is so cool. Like I can make a positive impact in the world, you know, like it sounds like, you know, like, oh, the peace and whatever, but like it's also like quite true. It's just like wanting to cause a positive impact and helping others.
To me, we were talking about this recently. It's like pride, like having a lot of pride in your work, and this is at least the same for Sentry. It's just like it's a great satisfaction when other people are using your stuff and giving positive feedback and contributing and stuff, and it's great if you get paid for it as well. But it's nice either way, you know, we don't get a lot of that in the world. And so, what's your version of this, Armin?
I think it's similar. It's like more interesting maybe than getting a number of people to use your project. It's like finding a handful of people that use it for the same reasons. I feel like, yeah, that's why I built it. Like certain topics are like more popular than others. So like I built a bunch of libraries where I feel like I wish someone else would care too, but it turns out like, well, that's too niche. But I feel like the fact of having like a bunch of people with similar ideas starting using it, I feel like, this is validation. It's really nice. And it doesn't have to be that many.
I think the opposite. I kind of think fuck other people and build what you're curious about. And if you can do that successfully, that like has led to some of the best open source. If you look at the open source where someone has set out to build something that's popular, I have set out to build things that are popular, and they have been universal failures. Whereas when I've set out to build something that I am curious about and that I want, it is much better. And you can tell the open source projects where the maintainer is an active user of them, and you can tell the open source projects where either someone maintains them out of obligation or out of some wish for popularity. So I think build the thing you care about and that you're fascinated by, and let the people do what the fuck they like. Sorry.
That's good. We get something in here. We get some like heat.
I didn't create anything. I just maintained it all.
I will say, I think this is actually, this statement is important because one of the questions was like, when are you going to add maintainers? And we were talking about this. It's not really relevant because what happens is when it becomes designed by committee, it kind of becomes a mess of shit and nobody wants to deal with it and people stop using it and you move on to the next thing. Like, Sentry's followed this philosophy since day one. We build whatever the hell we want. And like, not everybody likes this at the company, but like, if somebody comes to us and asks a feature and we don't want to build it, we just say no, which by the way is not a good way to do sales. It's terrible. But it's actually really important, and you can appreciate whether Python's made all the right decisions or not. Like Guido, like kind of being that BDFL, it's a really important model. It keeps like a vision, like an alignment of like, this is how we're going to do things. And I think, so yeah, there's like fears of bust factor and all these other things, but like you should have an opinion on a thing. It's not, nothing's generic. It can't solve every problem. And so I think that is actually really, really important.
I also think that is, like, you know, when people say maintainers, it's not very clear what is the definition of maintainer. What is a maintainer, and what do people expect when they say, like, do you have or not more maintainers? Maintaining a project is a lot of tasks. One of the biggest ones is just like answering questions, and that's what like Marcelo is helping a lot doing. So, you know, like, it's actually helping me maintain FastAPI. But that can be done by anyone that comes and joins and just like goes and helps others.
Replaceable.
No, the funny thing is, no one needs any type of permission to do it, and still no one really does it. Just Marcelo, and like, you know, a few others. It's just like, you know, like 5 or so, and like no one does it as much as Marcelo. So it's not really about like, oh, who has the permissions to do stuff. It's more about who's willing to roll up their sleeves to put the time and work to do stuff and help. So yeah, thank you, Marcelo.
You are welcome.
Why? I got 2 more. We're going to run like 2 minutes over. Why do you do it?
The beginning was a challenge because I was just answering issues, but I was learning a lot from the questions. So I actually didn't know what was written there, so I just learned what was written there first. So I got a bit of knowledge from learning the question, and then more knowledge when I was answering them. So the beginning was
curiosity.
Learning process. I was learning a lot from others, like I just tried harder to Google, I guess. And yeah, I mean, now it's fun to build more stuff. Like at some point I started really developing stuff and got more challenging. A bit of habit right now as well. Like it's like I do this every day since I started, so it's also a habit, but I really like it, so
Yeah.
that's it.
All right, we're gonna be fast on this. You get one sentence. What would you change about Python?
I have too many conflicting stares at me.
Just
Look,
one, just
Armin
one
is
thing.
looking at me.
It's a
Lucas is
bikini.
looking at me. One thing I would change about Python. I don't really know. I think we have growing pains, but I think it's just like going in the right direction in the way that we are doing. I hope we can manage to be like even more friends than we already are. So yeah, that.
All right, you'd make us all friends.
What?
You'd make us all more friends.
Yeah, I think so. Probably.
All right. We need some spicy takes in here. That's kind of you're like, I'm going to be nice.
Nothing especially spicy. I think I would produce something that killed poetry and PDM and Rye and all of them and just allowed you to run Python, and dependencies just worked.
So package management.
Sorry for Rye as well.
All right, who we got next?
I'm ready to kill my package manager if anyone just fixes it for me. I didn't want to build it. Can we just, I don't know, really get together for like a month? And
Are you
fix
also
the
on the
problem
package
once.
management train? Is that that's your change?
Yeah, my favorite pastime is Python packaging. It's great.
Ooh. All right. Don't tell me you're also on the package management train.
No, I don't have anything in mind. I don't know. I just have one thought in mind, but it's a typing thing that I want. But it's not that much. It's something that's going to be created at some point, I guess, because it's on some discussion. But it's just a way to convert type dicts into data class transform things.
But not adders, right? Just data classes.
Huh?
Just data classes, right?
No, it's like sometimes you just have a dictionary somewhere and then you want to do, there is something internal that does something and then you need to use something that looks like a data class. I really want that. And that's the only thing that the only thing I'm thinking right now.
All right,
David,
well,
what's your wish?
I have one really also specific, also important, like negative optional dependencies. Being able to remove things with optional dependencies.
package management.
Still package management, but like much more specific.
Is this somebody here? I think somebody here is in charge of package management. Like, this guy. If you have complaints about package management up here in the front, I would remove types. That's just my personal opinion. I liked Python 2. It was great, but I write TypeScript, so cool. All right. Feel free to harass them after this. Thanks everybody for entertaining. Hopefully most of us, and and thanks everybody for coming, for drinking the beer and eating the pizzas. So, and I don't know, are we done? I don't know what I'm supposed to do. I'm not in charge.
Thank you very much, and thank you all for being here. There are more drinks and stuff there, and we are just gonna be mingling. So see you on the other room. Thank you very much. Thank you everyone.